Yeah, okay. So, dear members of the European Parliament, dear representatives of the European Commission, dear Executive Director of REN21, dear colleagues and friends of the European Energy Policy, Dr. Véronique Cabiot and myself, Christian Malcor, welcome you in name of both our academies. We're extremely honored with your presence online and as well in this historic building where our academies are hosted. The Belgian, French-speaking and Dutch-speaking academies we represent find their origin in 1772, long before Belgium was founded in 1830. It was the Austrian Empress Maria Theresia who created the then called Imperial Academy. You can admire her painting hanging on top of the staircase in the entrance hall of this beautiful building. Professor Cabiot will give you now some key historical facts on this building.
Yes, although I'm a chemist, I will provide you with a bit of history. In 1815, the Battle of Waterloo ends the war by the defeat, as you know, of the French army of Napoleon. The Crown Prince, William of Orange-Nassau, was among the coalition that defeated the French. To thank him, the population decided to build him a palace. The architect, Charles van der Straten, designed a building which, and you can see it very well from the outside, is a pure example of neoclassicism, designed according to pure geometric proportion, Renaissance symmetry and axiality. It's a building for scientists. William of Orange-Nassau and his wife, Anna Pavlova, lived in the palace from 1828 to 1830. Then the Belgian Revolution took place and Willem had to leave. The palace hosted then several military corps and was even used as a German hospital during the First World War. This building was then given to the government and it hosted then several academies.
Yes, and today two of these academies, called Académie Royale des Sciences et des Lettres des Beaux-Arts de Belgique, abbreviated ARB, represented by Véronique, and Koninklijke Vlaamse Academie voor Wetenschappen en Kunsten van België, abbreviated KVAB, represented by myself. We operate today under an association, the Royal Academy of Science and Arts of Belgium, created in 2001 to ensure our common noble purpose, namely to promote science and art in Belgium and to coordinate the activities carried out at national and international level. Professor Cabiot will give you some key elements on the French-speaking academy, and then I will conclude on the Flemish Academy.
L'Académie royale des sciences, des arts et des lettres was founded, as already said, in 1772, and today it is composed of 4 classes of 60 full members and 50 associated members. The classes are science, letters and moral and political sciences, arts, and technology and society. We also start building a young academy, the Collegium, which is composed of members who are less than 40 years old. The class Technology and Society, to whom I belong, make the bridge between technologies and societal questions through an interdisciplinary approach, since the class brings together engineers, politics, sociologists, economists, etc. It's a very fancy, funny, and motivated class. We work on topics such as IA, defense, social responsibility of companies, etc. We publish books, reports, and we organize public debates on all these topics.
Yes, and then the KVAB is composed of 283 full members and 57 honorary members, and they are also spread over 4 classes. the technological sciences, the natural sciences, humanities and arts, covering the same disciplines as our colleagues of ARB. Equally so, we have also a young academy called the Jonge Academie, with also members under 50 years old of age. Within and between these classes and the topics of key importance for Flanders are reflected, and the outcome of this is presented as an independent science-based advice in position papers, colloquia, and public debates. Our stakeholders are professionals, policymakers, and the social society as a whole. The information we develop is then shared through networks and has then value for Belgium, Europe, and the world. In the class of technological sciences, which I share for the moment, we also have reflection groups, one of which might be of particular interest to you. It's the Energy Reflection Group. I can invite you to look at their website, Energy Reflection Group, KVAB, and to discover information on an extremely broad range of energy-related topics, such as small modular reactors and nuclear fusion reactors, and also, for instance, the central role of the end user in the energy transition.
Since now you know almost everything about us, we are looking forward to hear your finding about your finding in the EASAC report related to security of sustainable energy supplies. We wish you a wonderful moment together, and I hand over to Georg from EASAC. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, and hello everyone. Thank you so much, dear Christiane and Veronique, for this really warm opening and interesting introduction by the Royal Academies for Sciences and the Arts of Belgium, the host academy of today's event, and also a member of EASAC, the European Academy Science Advisory Council. My name is Georg Bervini-Koprona. I'm the Executive Director of EASAC, and I welcome you all on behalf of EASAC to this event today, to a launch event of our report, Security of Sustainable Energy Supplies. Unfortunately, our President, Wim van Zalos, was not able to join today due to prior and urgent commitments, but he sends you all his best regards. Oops, sorry, now I went too far, one slide. When we talk about security today, I think then recent geopolitical developments have made it clear that our security as Europeans is not just about defense, but also about energy supplies. This is also reflected in the latest Eurobarometer survey, where 66% of EU citizens indicate that they would like for the European Union to play a more significant role in protecting them against global crises and security risks. And when asked about aspects that the European Union should focus on in order to reinforce its position in the world, EU citizens mention energy independence, resources and infrastructures right after defense and security, and competitiveness and economy. Of course, energy security is also on top of the Brussels agenda. For example, with a recent meeting of European energy ministers in March, focusing on the action plan for affordable energy and the Project EU strategy that has been presented last week. All these mentioned issues are also addressed in the policy report that we launched today. Prepared by a group of experts from EASAC's member academies, this report is an evidence-based contribution to support European policymakers as you work to deliver energy supplies that are secure, sustainable, and affordable. And the report also highlights that investing in sustainable energy is not only essential for climate goals, but also a strategic necessity for security and economic stability. We are really very happy to have such a diverse audience here today, basically fully booked room, despite the national train strike today. And I also welcome representatives of the European Commission, of the European Parliament, of NGOs, and many more here, and also online. Before we go right into the topic, 2 short remarks on the European Academy Science Advisory Council. As a network of 28 European national science academies, we provide independent science-based advice for European policymakers. And through this network, through this academy network, we can really mobilize the best scientific minds in Europe to assess pressing societal issues and questions. EASAC has a current focus on environment topics, on biosciences and public health, and also on energy topics. And of course, today the focus is on energy topics with this report written under the auspices of our energy program. To give you a short overview of today's program, first our program director Bill Gillett will give an introduction to the project Security of Sustainable Energy Supplies. Then our working group co-chair Paula Kivima will present the main findings of the report. And then we will have a panel discussion with 6 panelists moderated by Bill, followed by a Q&A session with the audience. Please make sure that when you ask a question from the audience to always use a microphone. Please bear in mind also that today's event is live streamed on YouTube, and the recording will be made available afterwards on YouTube. Now I would like to invite our program director, Bill Gillett, to introduce the project. Bill has worked for EASAC for 11 years now, if I'm correct, and before that he has worked for the European Commission in Brussels for 14 years. Bill, thank you so much for introducing the project to us.
Thank you, Georg. So thank you very much, and welcome to the people online and the people in the room. It's a great honor and a great pleasure to share with you the report that I'm going to share with you now. Let's see if I can make all this work as it's supposed to. Yeah, so that's the heading. First of all, to say EASAC's been working in energy for quite a few years, and here are a few of the things that we've been working on. And I think our work on the security of sustainable energy supplies, it builds on the work that we did a year or so ago on the future of gas and the decarbonization of buildings before that, and the decarbonization of transport. And I think probably this latest report is working in the fastest evolving geopolitical context that I've ever experienced in my life. And yeah, it's been quite a challenge, and I think today's discussions are a step along the road, and the report itself, well, we will learn from it, but we should build on it. The working group had 26 experts from 21 countries, so it was quite a broad perspective. And one of the things that we realized very early on is that the situation for security is not the same in every European country. And similarly, the energy situation is not the same. And so the evolution and the priorities and the things to be done, some should be done at a European level, but some of them will have to be done at a national level, because we are, and that's the joy of working in Europe, we're all a little bit different, and it's good. So the report, as Georg was saying, is a kind of a starting point for discussion, but I think we will probably see the shelf life of some parts of it a bit limited. We try to have shelf life for our reports of 2 or 3 years. In this case, things are moving very quickly, and I hope this debate and this record of your discussions today will bring it a little bit even further up to date. It covers a bit about the energy transition. How can we switch from fossil fuels to sustainable energies? It talks about the different energy technologies, the carriers, the fuels, the related issue of the strategic materials, the critical raw materials, the very hot topic today of cyber security, and of course we're seeing a move into electricity, so quite a bit on that. We also highlight that energy security has risks, but if we address it in a good way, we can also create benefits. So what does energy security mean? I think one of our scientists told us that they'd found more than 50 definitions of energy security. So don't be surprised if this little one from the IEA is not the one that you like. The reality is that it's about the uninterrupted availability of energy in some way, and cost and price and affordability are part of it as well. And the two biggest threats today, I guess, are the volatile geopolitics, about which we talk quite a bit in the report. That's malicious attacks, physical attacks, cyber attacks on not just supply chains, but also infrastructure. And then there's the whole challenge of climate change, which is a very real risk to our energy security. And we're saying that the old thinking was all about importing fuels, and the new thinking is about investing in Europe. And there are lots of energy policies out there. We've had energy policies from the early year 2000 when we had a white paper on the topic. And we've got all kinds of things which have been agreed and adopted and now form the framework for our energy policy and our energy security thinking. I think the bottom line is there's no security without energy security. But also important is there's not much security without the implementation of our policies. And the focus today, I think, has got to be on how are we going to actually make some of these good ideas really work? Will the legislative framework actually be implemented? And what can we do to help with that? The old energy trilemma has been with us for many years. But what we've seen in the last, well, since the invasion in 2022, is the shift in focus from the sustainability agenda, the Paris Agreement, the decarbonization, the reduction of carbon emissions, to the security agenda. And that's embodied in the REPowerEU initiative, and more recently, in the last few weeks, the Clean Industrial Deal. And I hope that we'll talk a little bit more about the Clean Industrial Deal. You won't find much about it in our report today because it was developed in parallel with what we were doing, and it was launched only about 6 weeks ago, which means we can't get it into a report that quickly, I'm afraid. Scientists are very clever, but they don't work quite that fast. So we will need to build on that in our discussions today. What the invasion of Ukraine did was to highlight that we're too dependent on imported fuels. Natural gas, 45% from Russia in 2022. But don't let that be the end of your thinking, because we're now making ourselves too dependent on imported liquid natural gas, with 45% or so coming from the United States, which might not be quite such a reliable trading partner as we used to think. Also important is our importing of nuclear fuels. Nearly 80% of our nuclear enriched uranium came from Russia in 2023, and we rely for quite a lot of our electricity on nuclear supplies. The other thing that we're too dependent on is imported energy technologies and materials. And we may want to pick up on some of this concern about the high levels of import of some of the sustainable energy technologies from the Far East. And it's not only about supply technologies. Our report focuses on two things. One, of course, is energy supply, but let's not forget energy demand. Because the way that we improve our energy security is to reduce our energy demand and to manage better our energy demand and our energy consumption. And for that, a lot of other technologies are very important, and we're also quite dependent on imports of these. And we're dependent on imports for rare earths, for critical raw materials. The other quite shocking increase since the invasion of Ukraine back in 2022 has been the growth in cyber attacks. I noted that Eurelectric reported on a doubling of the number of cyber attacks between 2020 and 2022. So this is a big issue as well. Now, the scientists and the energy modelers, the energy system modelers, have been modeling lots of different potential systems. You see here a bit of a picture of some of the results from the scenarios that were used for the 2040 targets that we had published a few months back. The emerging trends from all this modelling, and there are lots and lots of different models. EASAC didn't do modelling for this report. We build on the reports of other teams across the world. We try to analyse and review what's available in the peer-reviewed literature and amongst the experts who are working amongst us. We had a special workshop as part of this project on energy modelling. And what is very clear is that electricity supplies are going up. They might even double by 2050. There's a very rapid growth in variable renewable electricity supplies, notably solar and wind. There was a lot of hype about hydrogen in recent years. I think that's cooled a little bit now. We can see there are some really important hydrogen applications in industry, in transport, and with the production of electrolytic hydrogen with electrolyzers, there's a potential for helping with grid management. So hydrogen has important roles, but we need to understand it sensibly and be realistic about it, not to spend our money where we don't see immediate or reasonable returns. And the other big issue which we might want to come back to in the discussion is a high percentage of renewables can actually be shown to work. There are people who out there who are saying you can't ever work with total renewables. I think the evidence is not that. So, quick look at the policies now. We have policies, as I was saying, energy consumption is very important. The three main areas are transport, industry, and Eurostat called it households. I think I'd call it buildings. What's very clear is that energy efficiency first has to be a driving motivator for our work on the demand side to reduce the demand. Circular economy, I see, is emerging again as part of the Clean Industrial Deal. That's a very potentially powerful tool for reducing demand. And last but not least, we need to think a lot about the embodied energy in the materials and the processes and the systems that we use. And so energy efficiency first is more than perhaps we used to think about it years ago. Energy market design is important. And we're seeing now a growth in the use of time of use tariffs, demand response. The electricity market design was recently updated, but I think we're learning lessons from that. And the challenge will be, how do we continue to evolve it without reducing the confidence of the investors in the energy sector? And in that sense, integration, I want to emphasize. And if we look at the modeling results, everybody shows that a more integrated energy sector involves a lower capital cost way, a route with less capital cost to a more sustainable supply mix. And then perhaps we'll come back to this in the discussion. There's a lot of discussion about capacity mechanisms. We can't stop we can't remove the fact that the wind does stop blowing sometimes. The sun doesn't shine at midnight, and we do have to manage that process. A lot of it can be done with demand response and storage, but the long Dunkelflauten for a couple of weeks, which do occur, we have to have provision for that. And I think there's a lot of debate about how to make the capacity mechanism work without providing windfall profits to industries or other unsatisfactory solutions. And then, of course, we have to bring the energy security together with the cyber security and the military security to protect our critical infrastructure and against the weather. Then on the supply side, I think we're signed up as a European Union to transition away from fossil fuels. When I listen and read the press these days, some industrialists don't seem to be totally on board, and not perhaps everybody in the European Parliament is totally on board with that as we were when we signed up to it a year or two back. There's clearly potential for producing more fuels and more energy technologies in Europe. The European platform, which DG Energy coordinates, for improving the competitiveness of our fuel purchasing so that we work together. It will have an important role. It has one now, and it will have it for renewable fuels as well. And it will potentially also help us with the enriched uranium purchasing. These things we have to do together as a European Union in order to get the best deals in a very complex global market. And the other thing that we need to think about is how we're going to secure the critical raw materials that we need in Europe. And I think the suggestions to partner with suppliers in third countries rather than just the old-fashioned way of buying when we want it will be a more important role. And we may even want also to look at more extraction and processing in Europe. Grid flexibility is an important part of the energy market. As we move to more electricity, we definitely need to manage the grid flexibility, and that has to be managed, yes, for variable renewables, but also for all the other sources, because we're now trading electricity across Europe, trying to get the minimum price for everybody. That's a nice ideal at a European level, but not all the citizens agree to that being so easy. And we certainly need to address the backup generation challenge. As I said, integration lowers the costs, and the options are a better integration with district heating. We don't have to use coal and oil and gas for district heating. Electric vehicles, we can use them back and forward, as we're beginning to see now, to feed electricity back into the grid as well as to charge our vehicle batteries. And in some parts of Europe, we will see integration with carbon capture and storage, where that fits with the industrial needs and where we can make it economically sensible. And as we continue with the digitalization agenda, we will see cyber protection becoming more important. Where are we going to invest to create value in Europe? Well, we have a long list of things that we want to invest in. The challenge will be to mobilize the long-term financing, which must be both public and private. And that's going to be a real challenge, I think, in the coming months and years. We need to strengthen our interconnectors and our electricity infrastructure. We want to be manufacturing more technologies in Europe. We want to strengthen our district heating. We want to have more battery production in Europe and more storage. We want to have more storage of heat. We want to produce hydrogen. All these things are going to cost money, and there's a big agenda for how do we manage longer-term financing at a time when everybody's worrying about short-term financing. And it's how we get that financing to work that I hope we will get some discussion on. It's encouraging that the transition to sustainable energy supplies is progressing well. It's also bringing some very important benefits. We're less dependent on fossil imports where we have renewable supplies. We have less volatile energy prices because the investment is made and then the price can be more stabilized. It's reducing some conflicts and it's reducing some supply interruptions. And on the wider benefits, it's lowering the damage from climate change and the health costs related to climate change. And it's creating value in Europe. So it's got plenty of benefits as well as costs. When we talk about the transition, we must recognize that we want a fair transition. And one of the challenges that we're facing at the moment, following COVID and following all the other volatile geopolitics, is that vulnerable groups in our communities are suffering. It's wonderful to say the polluter should pay. That's fine if the polluter has got the money to pay. But if you're a vulnerable household or a vulnerable group, you need help. And it's important that we actually provide that. The Social Climate Fund is one, but I'd be interested to hear whether maybe we've got some better ways also to do that. And that involves citizen engagement. And I think Paula will talk about that in a moment. So to bring my summary to conclusion, I've talked a little bit about energy security, the importance of phasing out fossil fuels, investing in infrastructure and technology production, and defending ourselves against cyber and malicious attacks. Sustainability remains as it was in the Green Deal. Let's invest to reduce climate change and improve our health. And we have a history of demonstrating global leadership in this. Let's continue to help. Europe is an important contributor to the aid across the world. Let's continue that. And then affordability, mobilizing long-term investment financing, engaging with consumers to reduce demand and therefore reducing investment needs, and helping the strategic industries and vulnerable groups. So to close, I would say science-based, evidence-based policymaking is what EASAC is all about. We want to help build investor confidence. We need to support research, training, skills development for energy security. EASAC is science for policy. We're not trying to say where investment should be put for future research. That's for another day and another area. What we're prioritizing is using the available evidence to guide our policies. Having said that, you will find at the end of the report a short list of some research priorities which we've highlighted as things which we think actually have come out of our work as needing a bit more research effort. And you'll find in the report this very nice infographic which summarizes some of the points that we've made. So I'm going to stop now and hand over to my dear co-chair of the working group for EASAC, Paula Kivimaa. Paula is a research professor on climate and societal transitions in the Finnish Environment Institute. She's also an associate in the University of Sussex in the UK, and for the past 5 years she's worked actively on energy transitions and security. She recently published, only a few months ago I think, a book on security in sustainable energy transitions, which focuses on experiences in 4 European countries. She's a member of the Finnish Climate Panel, the Joint Research Centre's expert group on fair and sustainable economy, and she's a DG GROW Fellow. So thank you, Paula, for co-chairing our working group, and I'm happy to hand the microphone over to you.
Thank you, Bill, and welcome to everyone in the house and also online, also on my behalf. So I'll start off by going a little bit backwards and talking about the history of European energy policy and energy security. Then I'm going to bring up 3 highlights from the report, which are not necessarily the most important ones. They're perhaps the ones that I find it easiest to talk about. You should definitely also, for instance, check the cybersecurity section. I found it very useful, but I'm not a cybersecurity expert, so I didn't start explaining it here to you. And then I'll end by some reflections on recent EU policies from this context. So 30 years ago, in 1995, European Union energy policy objectives were competitiveness, secure supply, and environmental protection. So pretty much the same as they are today. Despite this, when we go back about 20 years, we see that in early 2000s, EU energy policy was mainly focused on market forces and liberalization of the energy markets, and less on energy security and geopolitics. With the enlargement of the EU towards Eastern European member states, there were more EU members who were somewhat concerned about energy security, and especially when we saw the natural gas disputes between Russia and Ukraine in 2006 and 2009, some more concern was presented. But nevertheless, both in the level of the European Commission as well as many of the member states, geopolitical concerns of energy played a rather small role. And climate change and market orientations prevailed. And this kind of import of fossil fuels has made EU very vulnerable to energy in energy security terms. When we look at the different member states, there are of course a lot of variety in terms of how the member states approach the energy transition, how they think about energy security and geopolitics. And even though one could generally say that Eastern member states have been more concerned about geopolitics, they're also not a homogeneous group of member states. The EU Energy Union strategy has for a long time had these following objectives: ensuring energy security via diversification of supplies, solidarity and collaboration, a fully integrated energy market, improving energy efficiency, reducing emissions, driving employment and growth, decarbonizing the economy, and promoting research in clean energy technologies to drive the energy transition and improving competitiveness. And even though the first point is ensuring energy security and diversification, in 2019, 25% of the EU energy mix was imported from Russia, which was hardly a very diversified approach. And effectively, it took until 2022 events and the Repower EU to more critically focus on security in the European energy system. So what are we facing today? We of course have, as Bill already pointed out, we have an increasing need to address the security in the energy transition. What this move towards increasingly electrifying society, electrifying heating, electrifying transport and industries, as well as a larger share of intermittent renewable energy, especially wind and solar, it means that this kind of traditional energy security option of stockpiling fuels is not a long-term energy security option for the EU anymore, and we have to develop other ways. We've also seen a rapid increase in these both intentional and accidental threats to electricity interconnections flowing between different European countries and the risk of cyber attacks. And it also means that we have to think also in terms of how do we protect the energy system, not only from, for instance, impacts of climate change, but also targeted attacks. And we can't help seeing the intensifying geopolitical situation, but also like claims that different countries globally make for energy resources and critical raw materials, which is also of concern. Besides this, we also see societal polarization, politicization of energy. And while I think it's the politicization part is good that people become more aware of energy consumption and where energy comes from, we also see this kind of polarization leading to increasing tension, spread of misinformation and resistance to the energy transition. And on top of that, we now have new goals for strategic autonomy and technology sovereignty in the EU. How do we increase those without slowing down the energy transition when so much of our technologies are coming from outside Europe? But I also don't want to just highlight negative aspects, so there are a lot of security positives, as Bill also pointed out. Sustainable energy sources help reduce risks related to international trade of fossil fuels. So for instance, trade wars, disruptions caused by climate change or other type of supply chains issues, price fluctuations can be reduced with the help of sustainable energy sources. Technological development has been quite surprising. I remember 10 years ago in Finland, a lot of people argued that this and this amount of wind power is just not physically possible, and already we are producing much more. And we have continuously improving energy storage technologies, demand response, and other solutions to balance intermittency. So I have faith in the technological development. What I also want to highlight, what's an important thing, is that renewable energy enables a diffusion of power, not only between different countries of the world. Okay, yes, it diffuses power from selected few states to more states, but it also helps to diffuse power from companies to citizens, so citizens can be more active energy producers and users. So just lifting up the three highlights, and we really wanted to bring this issue of citizen engagement also, because often when we think about energy security, we think about states' responsibilities, we think about large companies, we think about technology, but also citizen engagement has a role in terms of reducing societal tensions and promoting the transition. And we've seen, of course, with the rising inflation and increasing energy prices, the increase in energy and transport poverty. And unfortunately, also often the different type of opportunities, finance and knowledge related to energy transition are less available to those in energy poverty. So what we really need is consultations with citizens and local communities, For instance, to replace the misinformation or just improve knowledge on energy security, the cost of different energy options, how energy markets work, because that can be quite complicated and difficult to understand, combined with support schemes for low-income households and vulnerable groups. Also, it's likely that well-informed active citizens who participate in energy markets are also less likely to block the development of the energy transition when they see its benefits more closely. Also, the different public authorities and project developers should engage with households and local energy communities when planning investments, and so that it's not just like a top-down process. For instance, there's good experiences via these one-stop-shop energy advisory centers. Another highlight, which we'll also already mention, efficiency first. So the EU's efficiency first principle makes sense because this means that even when electricity demand is of course growing, when you're electrifying industries and transport and heating, you can still lower the need for end-use energy by improving efficiency. So in that sense, it's a no-regrets option, which improves energy security. However, as I mentioned, the electricity demand is projected to increase, so we also need more efficient and time-responsive use of electricity that can substantially help energy security. And I know the member states are quite in different positions, for instance, in terms of what type of contracts are offered to households in terms of electricity, but more time-responsive tariffs. Electricity market measures are important in guiding the development towards improved energy security, so we can have advanced models for long-term contracts, power purchase agreements that can stimulate investments into sustainable energy supplies. As I mentioned, we could have more dynamic pricing and time-dependent tariff schemes, not only for large electricity users, but also for consumers. And then we need these flexibility measures, such as storage and strong interconnections between different countries. So just sort of some of my these are my personal remarks. As we finalized the report at the end of last year, before it was sent to review, we didn't really have a chance to comment there on the new EU policies. And I think on the broad level, one could say that the EU is on the right track. So when we look at the competitiveness compass that came out this year, it emphasizes both decarbonization and resilience as important objectives. The Clean Industrial Deal supports not only the development of energy clean tech, but also electrification of energy-intensive industries, which will also improve energy security. And the Critical Raw Materials Act aims to improve strategic autonomy in the provision of raw materials for sustainable energy. But of course, there are many unresolved issues and tensions around this. I'm just mentioning some here. First of all, we already noted that different member states have different interests, but also speeds in the process of electrification and decarbonization. Are there ways, how could the EU, for instance, increase its steering and preparedness in this field? I also couldn't help noticing that despite the geopolitical turbulence, the Clean Industrial Deal talked about economic security instead of broader security or hard security. And this made me think that is there sufficient alignment across the multiple policy domains that we now need that are interconnected with energy and security, industrial, energy, climate, security and defense. And we also see that a strong framework for European energy security is emerging, but how can we really stimulate the needed massive financing needs and the commercialization of innovations? And these are just some issues, and there are also some environmental concerns that besides decarbonization that we need to be aware of. I think that was, yes, now we're ready to move on to the panel discussion, so thank you from me.
Thank you, Paola. Thank you very much. So you can now breathe a sigh of relief. You've had the presentations. Now we go into the exciting bit. May I invite, please, our panelists to come and take a seat at the front. And there's no obvious order, but maybe we could just go down the line. Maybe, Thomas, if you come here, and then maybe, Claire at the other end, and the others fit in the middle. Does it work? Super. So, EASAC takes great care to protect its independence from commercial, industrial and political bias. So we're very delighted to have today two members of the European Parliament on our panel. They're both members of the horizontal cross-party committee on industry, research and energy, what we call the ITRE committee. And so I think nobody can say that we're trying to be particularly for one party or another party. Please just feel free to speak on behalf of your work as you are. Welcome again to participants who are joining us online. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to ask each of you in turn to respond to a first kind of open question, and then we'll try and get some dialogue between the panelists. And I also hope that we can have some dialogue with those of you in the room. Unfortunately, we can't have it with dialogue with people who are online, but those of you who've kindly come to join us today, you're in a privileged position that you can ask all kinds of difficult questions to our panelists. So I'm going to begin with Thomas Pellerin-Carlin and say, Thomas, you come from France. You're a member of the Progressive Alliance of Socialists and Democrats. You're going to talk to us today in your role as a ITRE committee member. You've worked on energy issues for more than 10 years before you were elected to the European Parliament, I believe, and you're currently contributing very actively to the work of the ITRE committee on energy security. We've seen that the report on energy security in the EU by Rapporteur Beate Seidler has recently been discussed by the committee, and in watching that, I got the impression that the energy transition is no longer as widely accepted as it used to be. How do you see this debate playing out in the European Parliament in the coming months?
First, thank you very much for the invitation. To summarize my answer, I think the debate in the European Parliament is divorced from reality. And so that's a bit problematic. Indeed, like that? Okay, better. So I indeed was a researcher, so thank you for the work that you've been doing. And there are a few MEPs that actually go into the details, and I'm one of them who actually love speaking about, gigawatt and terawatt hour and looking at graph. That's kind of I think it reminds me of the good old days of when I was a researcher. By good old days, I mean like a year ago, because that's for how long I've been in politics. And on top of that, I also served in the French army as a French Reserve Army officer in the military HQ. So let's say the high-level command in Paris, where obviously we've been looking at what Russia has been doing for now more than a decade, attacking us in different ways, not only in Europe, but also attacking our interest in Western Africa, where I was more directly involved as part of the French army. So the debate in the European Parliament is largely divorced from reality. We have a good third of the European Parliament that believes and says that the EU should have the same energy policy as Donald J. Trump. Here, I'm speaking as a researcher here more than as a politician, but like if people say we want to have the same immigration policy as Donald J. Trump, then we can have a rational discussion on that. Like, should we build walls? Should we kill people? Should we put children in cages? That's something that we can do. I don't think that's something that we should do, but there's something that we can do. But if you talk about energy, like, can we drill, baby, drill? Can we become what the US is, which is the #1 global producer of oil and the #1 global gas producer in the world? No, we cannot. And I'm a bit tired by how often I need to remind a third of the European Parliament that because of geology, not because of politics, but because of geology, we cannot have the same energy policy as the USA. The question is, what happens for the other 2/3 of the European Parliament? And here what I see is also let's say, a temptation to not look at the facts. So what are the facts on the ground? And you reminded some of them already. 70% of our energy is oil and gas. 70%. What we need to look at is the final energy mix. So sorry if I'm being a nerd here, not the primary one. A lot of politicians look at the primary energy mix because that's the thing that tends to be in front of them. But what we need from a human activities perspective is the final energy mix, that's essentially the energy we put inside machines. And once we do that, we discover that we're not that different in the end. So you said actually, William, earlier that we are a little bit different in Europe. I would emphasize the little bit. We're not that different when it comes to energy, because what matters in final energy, and if you can name me a country for whom the first energy source for final energy is not oil, please name it. And then gas is number 2 or number 3, depending on the country. If you take France and Germany, if you look at electricity, obviously they're vastly different. But if you look at the final energy mix, the number 1 energy source in both of them is oil, the second one is gas. And the third one is actually renewables for both of them. The second figure that I often recall is that on average, we Europeans pay 1 billion euro per day to buy fossil fuels. It changes obviously depending on the oil price, and thanks to Trump, we're going to pay a little bit less because creating a global recession out of nowhere is a good way to have a lower oil price. Where does that money go? A little bit of that money go to our friends in Norway, who could actually use more of that money to support Ukraine, by the way. But the vast majority of that money goes to our enemies. We are funding, directly or indirectly, by increasing oil and gas demand, the Russian Federation, that is at war against European democracy. Azerbaijan, that, let's say, has a specific vision of the role of Christians in the Caucasus, especially if they are ethnic Armenians. The Islamic Republic of Iran, that is financing global terrorism. Saudi Arabia, that is financing some kind of Wahhabi Erasmus all over the world and contributing to radical Islam, especially terrorism in, well, essentially 2 major continents. And, well, okay, I can continue, but essentially, no, but like, why am I saying this? Like, if you were coming from another planet and you would land in Europe and you'd be asking, like, why? Like, why on earth do you have a system that relies on energy that you don't have, that is giving money to your enemies, and that is also, by the way, destroying the environmental conditions that allow human life on Earth? Like, why? Why are we doing this?
That's a very good question on which to move on, if that's all right.
Maybe just 30 seconds.
One last thing?
Yeah, just on the divorce. So now we have that discussion. Tomorrow, Ville and I will be in the ITRE committee. We'll have to vote on a demand from the one far-right group on whether we should dismantle EPBD, the Energy Performance of Building Directive. And so we see the mismatch. You say energy efficiency first, and today we'll fight and hopefully we'll win, just to not do more, just to protect what we have.
Thank you. We'll come back to that, I'm sure. I'd like to just go round once with a relatively short input, and then we come back to these very important points again, please. So, Ville, you come from Finland. You're a member of the group of Greens and European Free Alliance. You're going to speak too from ITRE perspective, I hope. As an MEP, you've worked on the ITRE committee not only in the current parliament, but also in the previous one, so you've got a lot of experience. You're chair of the delegation to the EU-Russia Parliamentary Cooperation Committee in the Parliament. So you're working on defence strategies. And we know that you're recently active in the debate on EU preparedness union. We're all worried about geopolitical volatility. We're worried about, as Thomas was just saying, the Russian gas issue. I think we seem to be getting agreement around the room that there's no security without energy security. But from your experienced position on the defence and security side, I look forward to your comments on our report and on the situation that we find ourselves in. Thank you.
Thank you. So obviously a pleasure to be here because this debate and the scientific background to it is a place where I feel more at home than in the discussions in the European Parliament, because it's based on facts and also understanding that, you know, how we can combine the different aspects of geopolitics, security, economic competitiveness and industrial competitiveness with climate and environmental goals as well. And I find that this is very much in the heart of what the Commission should do this period. And I think your report, what I hear of it, is basically a very good starting point for what we should do. I also have a personal background on doing a bit of research on this theme and working over 20 years with energy-related geopolitics. I did my master's thesis in 2003 on how Russia uses energy as a tool of geopolitics. And I was wondering for 20 years why nobody sees it in Europe. I left the government of Finland. I was Minister of the Environment in 2014. I left the government because the majority of the government decided to give a permit to Russian-built nuclear power plant by Rosatom half a year after the Crimea invasion. So I was wondering why they don't see that Putin sees us as weak. When they invade Crimea, we just buy more nuclear power plants and Nord Stream 2s from them. So Putin got the message that Europe is weak, and they just put very weak sanctions on a few oligarchs, and they will continue business with me, so I can do whatever invasions I want to build the empire that Russia feels that they need and they have a right to. Russian foreign policy is based on imperial thinking. It has never changed. It never changed during the last 30 years. It was always based on that, and we were stupid not to see it because we thought that the Russians would somehow adapt our values without listening to what they're actually saying. So this has to stop in Europe, that we see everybody in the world automatically somehow behaving with the same rationale as we have. And this is, you know, European Union was built as a place where, you know, when we as democracies are in the same union, we don't have wars with each other, and that applies to democracies, but it doesn't apply to authoritarian countries. So we have to also understand that the world is very different now, and there is not a similar drive towards globalization like there was in the 90s, and also progress of liberal democracy. So energy should be seen from this light. The more we are independent from authoritarian powers on energy, the better chances we have to promote our values in this world. And if you look at energy security, like Thomas said, 90% of our gas comes from outside of EU, oil even more so, coal a high amount as well. So it's clear that energy security is very closely linked to the transition to renewables and energy efficiency. Nuclear may play some role in there. I'm a Finnish Green, so I'm not a fundamentalist on this issue to neither side, but I'm just saying let's listen to the economics as well. It's very expensive to invest into nuclear, so it has a role, but it's not a super high role because the investments take 20, 30 years to actually be funded back, and renewable investments are faster, and there are risks related to new investments into nuclear, like the long time scale, so that we are not going to reduce emissions as fast as with renewables. And the productivity increase of wind and solar has been higher than even the Greenpeace anticipated 10 years ago, and we thought that some politicians thought that we can't listen to Greenpeace analysis, but the productivity increase has been so huge that the International Energy Agency is now saying that solar is majority of the world's energy production by 2040, and wind will also be a big part of the rest of that. So if we look at where markets are shifting, it makes economic sense to invest into this. We will have a higher share of that market, and it will be very important for our energy security if we think about the where we buy energy from, so we get rid of that problem. But it's also more decentralized energy system, more electricity, so we have to invest into electrification. It will be more prepared for different kind of risks and attacks. There are vulnerabilities though, which I would like to very shortly raise. Inverters of solar panels, 80% are controlled by the Chinese already. We have to think about kind of like strategic independence and autonomy on being too reliant on individual countries also when we invest into renewables. And then there are risks related to cyber attacks. If we electrify more of the society, the electricity system and the grids need to be strong enough to withstand that. There are risks for everything to be very open and transparent. The Russians know where our cables are undersea in the Baltic Sea because we have been stupid enough to tell everybody where they are. Because we thought it's open and nice that nobody goes and hits them if we tell them where they are. But the Russians don't work like that. So we just have to adapt our thinking into this new geopolitical reality. But at the same time, it's not at the cost of climate and environment, because it makes 100% economic sense to invest into renewables and the energy transition. So the biggest worry for me is that the Commission takes a step back from the energy transition due to the pressure from the hard right, and starts to rely on gas, for example, which is still imported and still very much slows down the transition. So we have to make sure that that slowdown is not happening.
Very good. That's a very timely point at which to hand over to Heitze Siemers from the European Commission. Maybe Heitze will respond a little bit to what you're saying. Heitze, you've worked in the European Commission for more than 30 years with responsibilities including EU relations with Japan, trade policy, consumer policy, maritime policy, and more recently you've been managing innovation and research in DG Energy. You're now a senior advisor in the Directorate, and EASAC's report was prepared more or less at the same time as the Commission was drawing up the Clean Industrial Deal, and it emerged only about 6 weeks ago, I think, and it proposes many of the steps that are actually recommended in our report that we were drawing up while you were doing the same thing, I suppose. I think it would be very good to have 2 points that I would ask you to comment on. One being maybe some concrete examples for how the very ambitious Clean Industrial Deal is really going to be realized. And I would also, especially in the light of the comments from our MEP colleagues, this omnibus regulation that's being promised, we've had one already in February, another one proposed in May, as I understand it, which could reopen regulations on the energy sector's legislative framework. And it takes us so long to get regulations through the Parliament. And with the current Parliament not looking like the one that I used to know, I'm quite worried about the whole concept of reopening some of our, particularly the sustainable energy regulations, the Renewable Energy Directive, the EPPD you mentioned already, the other energy regulations. Are we really going to see these reopened? But don't feel you have to answer my questions, Heitze. I leave it to you, please.
Thank you very much. Well, we certainly got off to a running start here, I have to say. It's an interesting kickoff. I'm going to hopefully partially answer your questions, but there's a couple of things I want to get off my chest as well. Well, the first one is that we definitely have a shift of paradigm that's happened over the last few years, but it's not necessarily a negative thing, right? It's just a different. I have to get the mic closer to my face and not move my head anymore. So shift of paradigm, because I think the start off of the whole energy transition discussion was very much based on everything that's the Green Deal and decarbonization, climate change as the focus. And now we're shifting, in addition to all of this, we're shifting very much to a perspective of energy security, which is the topic of our discussion today, the topic of your paper. Second point I would make is I find it hard looking at your paper to find anything to disagree with, because it does state a lot of the things that either we're already doing or that is on the cards for work that we're taking on. Third point I would say is what is really important, because it's always I would say it's easy to stake out and to state what are the big problems and what are the things that upset us. But the other side of the story is to deal with all of the challenges that we have in front of us. And that's really what this commission and this mandate is all about. It's not just a question of saying, we have a problem here or there and we're aware of it, but it's really trying to deal with all of these challenges combined, which, let's say, have received several layers of additional complication over the last 10 days. But anyways, to stick with the topic, first of all, energy transition, energy security, really two sides of the same coin, and I think we all sort of agree on this. You need energy security to be able to phase out fossil fuels, and phasing out fossil fuels increases energy security. So both of the two have to be done together. We are obviously focusing on this right now. You will all be aware that there was a consultation period between September and November on energy security that has been now closed, and we're looking at all the outcomes of it. And the end result will be some proposals on energy security, which will take place in the course of this mandate. Not immediately, but in the course of this mandate, somewhere around 2026, I think, is important. Next thing I would say is, coming back to this idea of different and multiple challenges, you were speaking in your report about interlinkages and economic security versus energy security. To put it in a simplified way, I would not worry too much about people missing these interlinkages because they are too obvious to be missed. Yeah, if you're looking at interconnectors in the Baltic Sea, for example, and cables in the Baltic Sea, it's clear that you're not just talking about energy security, you're also talking about security overall. And there are other examples, I won't necessarily list up those, but there are other examples. Next point I would make is that everything that's related to the energy transition is actually on a really good track. I think there was quite a bit of pessimism in the course of 2024 about the reduction of investment or the reduction of speed in installing some of the renewable energies. But still, we added 78 gigawatt of newly installed wind and solar last year. And just to give you one figure that's very important there, and this goes right to this argument of dependency on fossil fuels or imported energy, let's put it more that way. Without that kind of transition, we would in 2025 now be paying 45 billion more for our energy bill than we did in 2019. So that progress is really there, but at the same time we of course have to deal with the realities and the challenges that we have. And that's where all the other elements come in, including things like critical supply chains, integration of energy markets, and phasing out of fossil fuels with the priority of phasing out Russian gas. Voila. Then what I would add lastly is this story about reopening or redoing energy legislation. I don't know whether you followed energy legislation over the last, let's say, 6 to 8 years. But it's been a constant flow of updating and reworking that energy legislation. It's not a question of reopening and potentially damaging it, but it's actually an optimization process. The same conditions that had us design the first version of the Energy Efficiency Directive are not the same conditions that we have today. Same goes for Renewable Energy Directive, for example. So constant updating and strengthening of what these instruments are doing is very much part of the exercise. And lastly, you will remember all the announcements made at the beginning of this mandate. Very important issue as well. We have to keep things manageable. Yeah, we have to keep things manageable, and that means also simplifying where it's possible to simplify. For example, reducing permitting times where it's possible to reduce permitting times. These are part of that particular story. Lastly, very important as well on everything that's related to security, where you've mentioned supply chains. I won't go into details on this, but very critical is to cooperate not only internally, but also with our international partners on supply chains and on critical raw materials in order to avoid bottlenecks or difficulties that could develop otherwise. Well, I'll leave it at that because otherwise I'm taking up too much time. And
thank you very much. I'm sure there will be questions on that, and I know Thomas has got a question already, but I'm going to quickly go through the rest of the panel so that everybody gets a chance to make their first message. Just for information, you mentioned your consultation. EASAC did actually reply to your consultation. Whether it'll get noticed, I don't know. That'll be interesting to see. But we did actually make a contribution to that. And I think this issue, I hope we come back to it in a minute, of the continuous updating of our energy regulations and legislation. This was a great process when everybody was on the same page during the Green Deal. What I'm wondering, and I'm sure Thomas and Ville will comment on this in a minute, I think we need to come back to how does the current change of the Parliament reflect on that. But let me move next to our next panelist. This is Gianluca Fulli from the Joint Research Centre. Gianluca, you know that the JRC has a mandate to provide science-based advice to policymakers, a very similar mandate actually to EASAC, and so we're very pleased to have a memorandum of understanding between EASAC and the JRC. It's a very important issue for us. And you're responsible for the unit at the moment in I was going to say DGJRC. It is DGJRC, isn't it? For energy security, distribution and markets. You also have a chair as professor in the Politecnico di Torino, and you're focused strongly on the electricity sector, so I'm sure you'll have some thoughts about that and the expansion of the electricity sector and some of the other issues that have come up. But let me pass the floor to you. Please give us your reactions and your messages for today. Thank you.
So thank you very much for inviting me in this panel. It's been very interesting to listen to the different contributions. As you mentioned, the JRC is the science for policy advisor inside the European Commission. So our role is to provide science and knowledge to support energy security policies. Today, building also on the report which was shared, I would like just to make three main comments of things we should do more to safeguard energy security. First of all, we heard about the interdependencies of the threats propagating across different sectors in the energy system, but also in material spaces like geopolitics, energy markets, regulations, and of course the cybersphere. More and more we need integrated assessment to cover all these aspects and understand how risk can materialize in adverse events and impacting the energy system. We are doing that at the JRC, supporting these policies through models and analysis in collaboration with DG Energy and the other policy DGs. The second thing I would like to share with you concerning things we need to do to safeguard energy security is to have more action-oriented tools. Now, in the digital sphere, we talk a lot about co-pilots. I think we also need co-pilots for policymakers and operators to defend and mitigate the risk attached to energy security in the energy system. And for example, digital twins could help to mimic in quasi-real environments what the consequence of a cyber attack would be in the energy system. The third message I would like to share with you is energy security. We heard several definitions and several possible terminologies to be used. I like to simplify saying energy security is about how this energy system might fail. Of course, it's not comprehensive, but energy security, we learned it's not just a techno-economic problem. It's a multi-actor, very complex, multi-stakeholder problem. So we need to address this problem in this context, like these platforms, and in structured fora, for example, the electricity coordination group, the gas coordination group, where we are collaborating, because I think all actors in society have a stake in energy security and should be contributing to assess this problem in a collegial way. So those are my main three introductory remarks. The JRC stands ready to work with you to support through science this energy security problem. Thank you.
Thank you, Gianluca. Thank you very much. I come now to Rana Adib. Rana is the Executive Director of REN21. I've always just called it REN21, but I understand it's actually the Renewable Energy Policy Network for the 21st century. So I got an education looking up about that. It's an NGO that brings together governments, industry, other NGOs, science and academia. It operates across the world. And Rana, you've been at REN21, I think now for nearly 16 years, quite a long time, half of which nearly you've spent as Executive Director. And you coordinate inputs from about 800 international experts to produce your highly respected Renewables Global Status Report, which many of us look at as it comes out every year. Energy security is an international challenge, and with the benefit of the global perspective that you have, I very much ask you please to give us your thoughts and reactions from your, let's say, global perspective. Thank you.
Thank you so much, William. First of all, I'll just maybe compliment on Rention One, because we don't describe ourselves as an NGO, but really as a stakeholder, multi-stakeholder network, or a network from those players. And let me explain why I'm insisting on this. We're speaking basically about massive paradigm shifts and the need for a systemic and holistic approach to those paradigm shifts. And I think this is where it is really interesting, because of those players, we have in Rention 120 institutional members, but also a community of 4,000 plus players across the different stakeholder groups, across the governance levels, so international organizations, regional, national, so the governments are members, and subnational governments, and city networks. But also it's a network of renewable players beyond renewable experts, because we actually see that the transition is not actually a transition of fossil fuel to sustainable energy in terms of fuel switch, but to building a renewable-based economy for prosperous societies. And I think this is basically showing the system change that is required, but also showing the variety of players and stakeholders and perspectives we need to include here. On your question as an international network, and I think here I would like to probably, I find it very interesting to look at the report. I also thought that during the last month we have actually consulted a lot with our members to define our strategy. And what comes out here is actually that when we're looking at energy security, we need to redefine what energy security means. When we're looking at our energy system, we have focused very much on the supply side, and also from the renewable energy side, we looked at the supply side, deployment of installed capacities. We have then realized, oh, we need the grids, otherwise we have curtailment. Now we realize we need flexibility, but we're forgetting the other part of the game, which is the energy consumer and the energy demand. And only if we change basically this perspective, we will also be able to deliver on one of the key recommendations, which is energy efficiency. Globally, the energy efficiency effort have actually not reached the 3%. You see there is the doubling energy intensity efforts that has been agreed upon at COP28. And we actually see that I think the percentage was at 1.5% on the last IEA data. So it has basically gone down. And we're not using the first source, which is energy saving and efficiency. But this is also because there is an inherent problem in the way we look at energy security and building up the system. We still, because let's be honest, you see a solar PV and player, wind, obviously LNG producers, oil producers, etc. They are interested in getting as much out as possible. So moving basically to the energy demand side, I think here it is really important to also look at the policy side. 85 countries in the world do not have one single renewable energy policy on any of the energy consuming sectors. Agriculture, buildings, industry, transport, 85 countries. And I think this already showed that when we are speaking about regulation and strong messages, at the European side, I would very clearly say there is a very big, and I think Europe is quite positive here because there are renewable energy share targets for the energy consuming sectors. This is something, there are economy-wide renewable share targets. But when you see that there is a lot of lobbying happening, and that's a reality, that is asking for postponing the phase out of internal combustion engines that are 30% of the consumption. Globally, only 4% of renewable energy share, so we're speaking about 30% of the consumption that depends to 96% on fossil fuel. This is something that is extremely critical. It's critical from the energy side. It is also critical for the industrial side, because industry needs very strong messages that the direction will continue. And if we're also honest, and that's probably the other paradigm shift I would like to mention, when we are speaking about digitalization, we didn't try digitalization with a typewriter. So the challenge, basically the revolution is already happening. And here I'm coming to some other countries, I guess, like Thomas, you asked for an international example. I think Uruguay is really an interesting example. 98% of the electricity depends on renewables, and 56%, if I'm not mistaken, of the total final energy consumption depends on renewables. Hydropower is quite significant, but but they have moved from, I think it was 60% of hydropower to 98% by investing in PV and wind. And that's something that is quite important. And I think what is interesting to observe in those countries is the fact that they are addressing basically the transformations and the transition of the energy consuming sectors to adopt basically this renewable energy part. And I think this is something we really need to acknowledge, and there is some learning here. Another example, also because I think it shows the affordability part, Pakistan has installed only last year, 17 gigawatt of solar photovoltaics. Admittedly, cheap solar photovoltaics coming from China, that's a reality. But I think what is interesting is to understand why they have done so. The energy price in Pakistan was so high that wealthy households, businesses and companies have invested in their own power generation. And I think here's a global number again. The share of households in energy investment has moved from 9% to 18% in only 8 years. And this is because of solar rooftop, it's because of heat pumps. And I just think this is, and I think you'll probably touch upon this, we heard it also in the report, I think it's really interesting to look very much into, when we're speaking about investments and energy security, to also bring this down to the fact that we speak about an opportunity to not only bring energy security, but also energy democracy into Europe. And I think that's really something important to mention, because it will allow to address affordability questions, but also allow to build the basis from society. Thank you.
Thank you, Rana. Thank you very much indeed. So we come to the end of this first round with a contribution now from Professor Claire Dupont. Claire, you're a research professor working on the governance of sustainable transformations in Europe in the Faculty of Economics and Business Administration at Ghent University here in Belgium. You're also a visiting researcher at the Institute for Climate and Society at the Dublin City University in Ireland. You're a member of Luxembourg's climate advisory body, the Observatory of Climate Policies. And until the end of last year, you served as the chair of the Science Committee of the European Environment Agency. Last but not least, you found time somewhere to co-chair our EASAC working group. Thank you very much for helping us with that. So I'm not going to ask you for reactions to the report that you wrote, but I would ask you, please, to use your professional expertise in this field to highlight one or two examples of maybe citizen participation in the energy transition that help to improve energy security. Perhaps you could find us some examples, some concrete messages from your work in Ireland or Luxembourg, and advise us also how best to present our messages to the citizens and local communities. How do we convince these people of what we're saying in language that they will understand and respond to? So Claire, over to you.
Thank you, Bill. It's been really interesting listening to all the respondents here. So I wanted to respond, I think, because I was really struck by your message that the interlinkages are so obvious, nobody will miss them. But our research shows that they have been missed for quite a long time. So we still need to keep getting that message across. And that's these are interlinkages that are across sectors, across political, economic, environmental objectives. They're also among different countries. So we still have some work in making those very obvious interlinkages obvious. And And I think this is also recognized in the energy trilemma that we talk about. A lot of research recently has been moving from this idea of an energy trilemma, where we focus on security, affordability, and environmental sustainability as the three objectives of energy policy, to now talking about what's called a quadrilemma. And the quadrilemma is the fourth part of that, brings in the cultural, citizen, and democracy aspects of our energy transition and our energy security. And I think what Rana was mentioning about energy demand reduction is one of those key pillars of thinking about energy democracy. How do we think about consumers as citizens, and how do we think about bringing those citizens on board to be more rational with their energy consumption? We had a fairly drastic response to that during the energy crisis, where citizens would wear a thick jumper. I think there was this wear a fat jumper, a heavy wool jumper sort of campaign that was actually quite successful. It wasn't such a hardship, and yet these are the sorts of easy things that we can do to reduce our energy demand, and we did in Europe manage to reduce our energy demand fairly significantly at a time where we really needed to in 2021, 2022. And I think that's also one of those things that shows that it's quite difficult to learn lessons from the past. And bringing citizens into this story is a really important part of helping us to learn the lessons, because it's the citizens who either suffer or who drive change. We see pockets of examples of energy democracy across Europe. We have a very good example in the island of Samsø in Denmark, where they have a long tradition of being an independent energy community. We have another example in Eeklo in Belgium, where the community have come together to ensure that they have their own renewable energy sources for the community. And there are many other examples of energy democracy where you have little communities driving their own energy security and energy independence. However, that has yet to really be scaled up. And I think there needs to be this stronger understanding of the possibilities of direct democratic engagement with communities in a network base that really brings the potential of the citizen engagement process to the fore. And we talk about that in terms of the climate democratic processes, energy democratic processes, and we can think about it also in the context of a fair and just transition that is about bringing in a multi-level and even transnational democratic context into the story. And I know you want to stop me, Bill, but I have one other point. Because I think one of the things that comes also very strongly across, which I hope that the report is able to help those who need to make sure that we don't roll back on the policies that are already there. We have talked a bit about the need for implementation of what we have. And I think we have this understanding that we're implementing in the context of a geopolitical context that's challenging, the geoeconomics are challenging, there's a change in the political paradigm and the traditional things that we can rely on politically. But we also are working in the context of a climate crisis. And again, it's the citizens who are suffering the climate crisis. It's citizens who can't insure their homes against floods anymore. It's citizens who have to deal with the impacts that they're suffering. And those are also means of disenfranchisement, means by which we can face further democratic backlash unless we engage the citizens properly through democratic processes. So I think the democracy side of things, citizen engagement, these all go very much together with the energy security challenges.
So thank you very much, Claire. You're absolutely right about the climate crisis. I can't believe that actually there's a fire risk and a national warning in Scotland for wildfires in this month of April. I mean, it's inconceivable what is actually happening to us. And I think the citizens will have to start waking up to this. But Thomas, you wanted to raise a question, so please, I just have a few minutes for questions between you guys, and then we'll open to the floor in just a moment. But let's have Thomas, and then I see also Ville wants to raise a question as well. Please, Thomas.
A quick reaction on citizens need to, like, I don't know what's the word you use, but like be aware of the climate impact. I mean, they are. Politicians are not, and that's the problem. The question is to the Commission. So you said for the last 6 to 8 years we updated the legislation. How many times, the order of magnitude, just in percentage, at the end of the day, what was the percentage of the number of changes that were voted by the PFE group? or what existed before. So the Orban, Le Pen, Lega people, I'm guessing close to 0. And now they can be part of the majority. And so that's the new political reality. In the good old days, like between 1950 to 2024, essentially we knew that the Commission would be tabling a proposal, and Parliament will be moving on the more pro-European and greener side, and Council on the more conservative side. But that's no longer the case. Now we don't know where the Parliament is going to move. And we know that on different topics, including the resolution on the EU budget for the year 2025, we had in the amendments an EPP plus far-right groups approach. And in that coalition, the number 2 player is the PFE group, so the so-called Patriots for Europe. If we look at who they are, one key member of the PFE group is the La Lega, which is the Italian party. Roberto Maroni is the vice president of the Italian government. He's from La Lega, and in the energy file in the ITRE committee, the coordinator of the PFE group is Paolo Borchia, who is also from the Lega. La Lega is a party that has a quote collaboration agreement with United Russia, Vladimir Putin's party. They signed that coordination agreement in 2017, and that coordination agreement was renewed by the party leader, Matteo Salvini, signing that in Moscow on March the 6th, 2022. That is like 2 weeks after the full-scale invasion. And under that agreement, so everything that I'm saying is from an article from Il Sole 24 Ore, which is kind of the, let's say, the Economist in Italy. And so it means that in Parliament, but also in Council, we are working with Russian assets. Like from an intelligence community perspective, we are working with people that have signed an agreement with Vladimir Putin's party about intelligence sharing. And so that's the big challenge that we have now. Because in the 6 to 8 years you were talking about, they were outside of the coalition. Now they can be inside the coalition or outside, depending on what the EPP chooses. And that leads us to a very different conversation, because I mean, when you're working with Russian assets, obviously you're going to have a different energy security than if you're working against them.
Please, Ville.
Yeah, it's just 2 comments on the democratic aspect. I think this is very important, and in Finland we have this preparedness approach to everything we do. So we try to think about education from the viewpoint of, you know, educated citizens have more media understanding, and they can also read through this information. And the same applies to energy. And I have noticed that in those EU member states, investments in the renewables have stalled, where people don't feel ownership about it, and they feel that it's like big capital money coming from somewhere else and taking, you know, and sidelining environmental protection is also a very bad idea, because then you get both the environmentalists and the local population against it. So the better idea is to have energy communities and some of the money going straight to the municipal authorities of that area and the local people. Then they want to invest into it when they have ownership. And I think this is very a core democratic issue, that energy transition is also about not just energy sovereignty for Europe and the big companies, but also ownership about how we produce energy by EU citizens. It's a big paradigm shift. You can be a producer, consumer, and the whole storage approach, the demand response, everything, you know, needs people to be empowered in this, that we are as effective as possible. But the Russian invasion did create some good examples as well. In Finland, I think in the autumn of 2022, Paula may correct me if I have wrong numbers, but I think gas demand in Finland reduced by 30% quite fast, because people were so into this that we try to reduce, you know, Putin's influence. So companies could reduce the demand, and then households could reduce the demand. We should have those kind of people all around Europe that are well educated to see the consequences of their energy use. It's harder in households that have gas boilers, because it's harder to change that, but then we need to have energy sovereignty loans, or energy poverty loans for those people to society to carry that risk of investment, and then they can replace the boilers with heat pumps or something else. So the other question I want to say also is about the omnibus, and I'm, with all respect to you, but the Commission is playing with fire here, because those people who are in DG Grow and other DGs than DG Ener or DG Environment or Climate, They don't care a shit about the environmental regulations. They don't know them. I've spoken with a number of people like Stefan Sejourné who didn't know that to promote critical raw materials, they have fast-tracked a mining project in Finland in a region which has the single most unique bog we have in Finland, which is doubly protected by environmental law. And Sejourné didn't know that when he made the decision about fast-tracking that. I mean, Commission is too siloed often. So you have a responsibility also to tell your colleagues that when you do the omnibus on energy, which I don't think is needed, but if you do something, I think it should be omnibus. What von der Leyen promised that omnibus is more or less only about reporting, but now it has turned into weakening here and there all around the place. And the business, it's not just about being pro-business or anti-business that omnibus somehow would be helping business, because you are choosing to protect conservative business who don't want to invest in the future over progressive business that want to have the predictability of the existing regulations, who want to, do the ESG reporting. They are saying to me now that why should we do this when the Commission is also backtracking that we don't want to invest into this. If we don't know where the EU is going, we don't do the investments. So you are creating uncertainty in the markets for those who would like to invest into the future. So that's the risk of omnibus. And in energy, I think the big risk is when I hear things like that let's take away the demand on ETS to have energy audits, obligatory energy audits for companies, which is in the ED, so the Energy Efficiency Directive, you have to do the audits to get the free allowances in ETS. Some say that let's simplify and take that away. So then you get the free allowances, so you can emit as much as you do without cost when you are energy intensive industry. And then you can also avoid the energy efficiency audits. So I would say that that's not very progressive. So just be careful with what you do, because the parliament can also, in the current circumstances, actually make it worse than what you propose. So it's not just you open 1 or 2 articles here. The parliament's majority, if EPP chooses to lean right, can wreak havoc.
Did I understand, Hatzi, you wanted to comment?
Yeah, just very quickly, because this is going to be a very lengthy debate, and it's views versus views in some points as well. I'm not going to comment on the composition of the European Parliament, as you can imagine. But what I can comment on is what we do as European Commission, which is that we propose things which are on the line of facilitating the energy transition, getting as much green energy in as possible, increasing our energy independence, etc., along the lines of what I said earlier, and that is going to continue. Now, there's a couple of other things I wanted to mention as well. First is on the interconnections between various policy areas. I didn't mean to say that this is something that's perfect, but it's certainly much more in your face now than it was before. That's what I was referring to, which is you can no longer ignore the fact that there is a security component to energy. Everybody knows this. And economic security, which is a very big part of what we do, not only ourselves, but also with international partners such as Japan and so forth and so on, has a connection to energy security, which is obvious, and that people are beginning to work out now. So I think there is really a bit of progress there. Lessons learned, that's very, very clear, including on everything that's related now to what we do in terms of energy security itself. And then lastly, yes, by the way, and I wanted to mention there as well, just for your information, if you look at the distribution of portfolios in the Commission, you will have noticed that there is a lot of interactivity pre-programmed between the various portfolios of the commissioners. One being, for example, on housing, which leads me over to the third point I had, which is this whole issue about energy democracy that you brought up, which I think is a very important topic indeed, and where nobody says that everything is perfect or whatever it is, but where there is quite a bit of effort being done by the Commission right now in the context of the Affordable Energy Action Plan and the Housing Task Force, which again, is situated with the Energy Commissioner, but at the same time obviously has cross-links to all sorts of other services in the Commission, other policy areas that we're working on. Voilà.
Thank you very much. I'm going to come to Rana in a moment because she was picking up at her microphone. I'll come back to you, Gianluca, as well. But could I just have an indication how many people in the room would like to make a comment or to give an input, just so that we've got a plan for that? I've got 1 here, 2, 3, 4, Okay, so I need to allow time, and we need to be quite efficient in giving our inputs, but I don't want to stop any input. So I let Rana, and I got the impression Gianluca wanted to say something quickly as well, and probably Claire, but let's be reasonably swift, and then we try to get something from the floor. Otherwise, we won't get the floor debate, which I really want to try to include. So Rana, please.
Very swift. The reality is we are operating in very different environment, and there are major risks. And I think it's really important that we look at the opportunities we have here. I take the citizens that are informed, and I think that it's also clear that not everything will be grassroots. We need very integrated energy infrastructure planning. Some learning here is at the country level, at the regional level, by bringing civil society organizations strategically from the beginning on into the discussion. It's not only increasing acceptance, but can also help to push and be more ambitious, because very often we see that some of the front runners are actually at the local level. So I think this is just something to really integrate more strategically. So thinking about some solutions here. Another part is, even though we very clearly see that fossil fuel industry and more conservative industry is quite heavy in influencing some politics, policies, regulation to slow down. I think it's also something where we need to basically develop, and I think here I'm really deliberately speaking about narratives, but a positive narrative about the opportunities that lie in change. And I think this is really something we have not managed collectively at the societal level, but also to position this in the different economic ministries. And here I'm speaking about, first of all, you see, there are massive blind spots. I take examples in Europe, the electrification rate of the energy sectors is not happening quick enough. I take the example of France. Renton One is operating in France, so I followed this a bit closely there. You saw that there was basically a regulation or support for lower income households to move to electric vehicles. Now there is not enough electricity demand. So this part has been stopped very quickly because there was such huge demand. On the other side, when we realized, or the French government realized, there is not enough electricity demand, at this moment, solar PV was basically, the support for solar PV was put on hold. And I think this is something where we need to see this in a more integrated way, but again, speaking about the industrial opportunity that do exist with regard to this. And here, a blind spot in many European countries, railway, for instance, is the largest single electricity consumer, and is very interested actually because volatile electricity prices is something that is also critical for businesses, is very interested to make this infrastructure available, integrate, participate in energy planning, and also move ahead. And just to finish, I do think there is a whole discussion about dependence on technologies being imported to European market. And here very clearly, the invitation that we do not only look at the different renewable energy technologies, we had a lot of focus on solar PV and wind. There are opportunities obviously on battery development and heat pumps, but there are also opportunities beyond basically the typical narrow, I guess, like energy technologies we are looking at.
Thank you, Rana. A quick input from Gianluca, and then I'm going to take, I think, a question from the floor.
Thank you very much. Very quickly, about consumer engagement and social acceptance. The GRC is mapping the initiatives on the ground on renewable energy communities, collective energy actions. And indeed, one of the instruments which could bring more citizens on board is regulatory experimentation, regulatory sandboxes, which is something being proposed by the Commission, so that you have relaxed rules to bring people on board and to see what's in for them in joining renewable energy communities. We have some reports on this, and I think this is an effective solution to increase the number of citizens participating in these renewable energy projects. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Gianluca. So I take the gentleman in the middle first, please. Gentleman there, yeah.
2 points. One, financing.
Sorry, please, could you say who you are?
Okay, my name is Walter Luijten from KU Leuven, University here in Belgium. About financing, the challenge of financing the transition was mentioned. In the United States, a lot of consumers spend more money than they have. In Europe, it's the other way around. That has to do a lot with the trade imbalance, but I won't go there. There's a lot of money sitting on the sidelines. I read just last week that finally the EU has realized that there's 10 trillion euros sitting in savings accounts in Europe that could be mobilized. If it's done in an economic way, it could actually mean a better return for those people who are now saving and getting very little interest. Also more citizen involvement. If your money is actually doing something useful, you may feel more involved. And finally, pension funds. Pension funds are by the EU, I'm told, and by some countries, prevented from investing in certain climate projects, whereas they are one of the few institutions that have a time horizon of decades, because if you start working now, in 45 years only, will those pension funds have to start paying out what you pay in today. So that's about the financing. The second is, we heard a lot about energy, but what I didn't hear is that fossil fuels are also a critical source of building blocks for the chemical industry. And this is something that we are not yet able to deal with and to replace, as well as we've been able to replace fossil fuels for energy. So can you please comment on that?
So I'm going to ask our panelists to comment on these questions together. Let's just take the collection. Andrea, let's just take the questions from the floor. There were a couple of other people at the back, please, the gentleman there, and then I come to you. Please make your points crisp, and then we can get a response.
Yeah, sure. So I'm Francesco Contino from UC Louvain in Belgium. I heard Professor Dupont mentioning rationalization of energy demand, and I heard energy efficiency first, but I didn't hear energy sufficiency first. Is that because it's naive to think it's possible? Is that crisp enough?
Thank you. It exists in our report, but we haven't discussed it so far today. There's a gentleman here, please, Andrea.
Jean-Pascal Van Ypersel, professor in the same university, Université Catholique de Louvain in Belgium. My question is a little bit related to what is the definition used in the report, and which I have not read yet, of sustainable. Does it include the biodiversity, the protection of biodiversity as well, for example, or is it only related to greenhouse gases? And then subsidiary question, did you look, when you spoke about the raw minerals needed for the energy transition, at the issue of deep sea mining and its impacts on the environment? Thank you.
Thank you very much. I can answer a little bit of that already, because EASAC published a report on deep sea mining only, how long ago? Less than a year ago. I think we've been very active on the deep sea mining agenda. And I'll ask Paola to come back maybe in a moment to talk about the issue of the definition. Did we have one more before we break? Yeah, there's a lady here, please.
Thank you. My name is Dragana Radanovic. I'm also coming from KU Leuven. I will probably confuse myself also with this question. The question is, we were talking about dictatorships and the role of a European Parliament that is currently going into that direction. My question is more like, are we aware that subsidizing dictatorships such as Russia or China by smaller dictatorships such as Serbia or Rio Tinto, as a company that is having a lot of shares directly from China, is this something that we are going towards? Because as I see, we are trying to solve the raw material problems with going into a bit more towards mining in Europe, and by Europe meaning mining in non-EU Europe, as far as I'm trying to understand what's going on currently in the room.
So I think we have quite a lot of questions to respond to. Claire, would you like to take the floor first? There's a microphone just here on the table. And then I come back to the ones at this end, who I'm sure will have responses as well.
Thank you. I might start with the last one, as it's the freshest in my mind, on the democracy. So I find this is a conversation about the just and fair transition in a global context. And I think we have this shift in narrative in the European Union political system of we're no longer talking about a just transition, we talk about a fair transition. And it seems to be focused on the EU's transition from fossil fuel-based economies in different countries and about getting skills and labor and financing job transitions. But actually, if we think about it in terms of, well, what does a just transition mean? It's also a global context. And this is also this example of Pakistan is a very good one, where you talk about the prices were so high, but that's because Europe was soaking up all the gas during the energy crisis, and Pakistan had blackouts as a result of our consumption, for example. And we see that also with the case in Serbia, where we do have lithium mining deals with the EU. We see it also now with the EU's shift to trying to get more gas from Algeria, another dictatorship. We have it also with the close ties with Central Asian countries. Von der Leyen was there at the Samarkand Climate Forum last week, I think, talking about the importance of the connections with Central Asian countries for critical raw materials. The case of Serbia is very interesting because we have year-long protests of citizens on the street against this deal. And so this is a kind of an example of EU green transition undermining democracy in our neighborhood. And that's not good for our long-term democratic security if we think about it like that. So I think there are questions to be raised about how we do that. At the same time, I do see that there are efforts to bring more of this mining and extraction into European Union countries, which requires a lot of citizen participation. I think the other question was on sufficiency. We do talk about sufficiency in the report. I think we're speaking more in the key messages in the policy language that's available. However, sufficiency is something that was almost achieved during the emergency responses to the energy crisis, and we could have built on that further, and I think there was a bit of a missed opportunity for going further for sufficiency. I think I'll leave the question of the definition to Paula, as I know that Paula studied all these 50 definitions, so maybe you'd like to come in on that very closely, and I know I've missed something. I think
you covered enough.
I covered enough.
I'm going to ask others who might like to comment. What about our two MEPs, Thomas or Villa? You seem to have your finger ready first. Go for it.
Yeah, just shortly, I think the questions are very valid, all of them. I mean, where does the money come from? How effectively we use the pension funds? Are there rules to restrict long-term investments? I think these are key issues that we are tackling in many of the member states, but the EU should have a joint approach to make sure that these are used for climate investments and energy transition investments. And then the democracy and biodiversity angles are also very, very key. I think that's the biggest risk in the current political debate, and that energy security is seen very narrowly and in a kind of like a biased way. So like some see energy security as buying gas from somewhere else than Russia. It's not really secure. So there is a problem here of the time perspective, and that we don't take into account climate risk, climate adaptation risks, and biodiversity risks. So I see that these are inherently should go always together, that we do energy transition in a way where we look at also win-win-win solutions with biodiversity and carbon sinks and climate adaptation, because that can be achieved in many places. We can, for example, invest into solar panels in destroyed peatlands in Finland, restore them to restoration work, get more carbon sinks, and then also produce solar from those areas that can finance the restoration work as well. So there are these kind of projects. And I think the big risk on the mining discussion is that politicians who don't know anything about the environment, how sensitive many of our nature living environments are currently, even in Europe. The biodiversity situation is not just globally bad, it's bad in Europe. And then we just have this push to have more mines in Europe. It means Finland and Sweden for many parts. And I'm very skeptical about that because the focus should be about better materials, long-term materials, better recycling, rather than have more virgin raw materials being extracted from the earth, because that overconsumption is the main cause of our current problems. So we shouldn't continue with more overconsumption just by calling it energy security or Green Deal. That's the kind of like greenwashing aspect, which I hate most about the Green Deal. So we have to, and I think science helps us here because researchers see the interlinkages, but politicians often miss them. So I think this report helps us in that regard as well.
So I've got a couple of minutes left before I'm going to have to hand back to Paola to make some closing remarks. I'd like, Thomas, if you'd like to make a last point, please feel free to do so. I'll ask the others to very quickly, if you've got a last point you want to make, or if you're happy that we draw a line, that would be good. But Thomas, please.
Yeah. Maybe to expand on this issue of mining and talking specifically, I mean, the situation is very different depending on the metal we're talking about. But there is one that is absolutely critical in the transformation, especially for clean mobility. It is lithium. 80% of global lithium is made in democracies. The number one producer is Australia, the number two is Chile, and we've got significant lithium production or reserve in places like Portugal, Finland, but also France. And so then the question is, so that's, let's say, on the bright side. Also, the big difference is it's much easier to recycle lithium than it is to recycle oil. So we actually have an exit strategy here. So what we need to do, but it's difficult, so we need to reduce the future demand for lithium as much as possible. That's where sufficiency comes into play, but let's be clear, there is no majority for that in the European Parliament. But we can try to work, for instance, in the French social leasing scheme that you mentioned, which, by the way, was not stopped because of lack of electricity. Last year, France exported 100 terawatt-hour of electricity, so that's not a problem at all. It's a national governmental decision not to put more money to help poor people. And that's the then government. We had like 3 or 4 in the meantime. But for instance, when you design a European social leasing scheme, which I think the Commission should do, not only like ask member states to do that, but do it itself, you can have concrete elements there that have a sufficiency benefit, for instance, by limiting the weight of the car. And if you limit the weight of the car, you de facto limit the amount of lithium you need for the battery, because the lighter the car, the smaller battery, the smaller the amount of lithium. Then those batteries can be reused, going from battery mobility to battery for stationary storage, to make sure that we can optimize the use of the existing grid, which is beneficial from an economic perspective, but also from an environmental one, because it means that we need less grid expansion, and therefore less destruction of natural habitat, less usage of copper, for instance, which is another critical metal. And then at the end of the day, to have recycling. The problem that we have today is that we're very good at Europe into transforming old batteries into black mass, which is one of the intermediary process, but then that black mass tends to be exported to China. The Commission has made a proposal to avoid that by labeling black mass as hazardous waste, but that black mass will still be exported to OECD countries, including South Korea, for instance. So we need to be a little bit more rational, especially in the new trade situation where we are, not only looking at tariff for imports, but also tariff for exports, to make sure that the critical metals that we already have in Europe, even when they are inside equipments, actually can stay Europe. Final word on petrochemical. There is one, actually we can do petrochemical without oil. We are able to create e-fuels. And so e-fuels can lead to literally e-kerosene or e-oil, which we can use for the petrochemical industry. Or biofuels could be also another option. And here the problem that we have is that there is a clear majority in Parliament and in the Commission, or at least one person in the Commission who really wants that, to say we need to have e-fuels for cars, which is laughable from an engineering perspective, but that's where we are. I hope we can move towards a more rational, and I'm going to end that sentence, and a more rational discussion when we understand that we will have e-fuels, but in very limited quantity, and we need to make sure that they're used for areas where we don't have an alternative, and that is the petrochemical industry, but that is also the military. Because, ladies and gentlemen, if we are to, let's say, defend ourselves from Russian aggression, one thing that Russia will do is send its submarines to torpedo all the oil tankers to put us under siege. And therefore, we really need to have e-fuels for our military if we need to be able to defend with weapons European freedom.
So, I'm sorry, I've let this time go just a little bit longer than I planned. Thank you, panelists, for your inputs. There will be drinks and more refreshments outside. We can continue this debate, but the people online who are following us are going to switch off in 2 minutes. So, Paola, I'm going to ask you to say a few closing remarks, and I particularly would like to say, before I step away, thank you to all the panelists for a very, very dynamic and stimulating debate. Thank you very much indeed.
Hi, thank you. It was a really, really interesting panel debate, and I think it probably could have gone on for another hour. And we can see a lot of a range of issues are so related to energy security. I just picked up a few things. Maybe I won't go into the definitional debate because you can read how we define things in the report. I think one that was highlighted, that there is still a lot of old thinking going around about the energy sector and the energy transition, which is especially a barrier, especially in the political field, for improving our energy security via the transition. But this is gradually shifting and also emphasizing the importance of consumers, demand and efficiency. The second point is that we're clearly in a world where the EU needs to, and European countries need to improve their technological sovereignty, but this also might impact the speed of transition and therefore also the energy security we are seeking for in the new system. So it's a tricky balance to be found for the new European Commission. The Commission and DG ENERA are already doing a lot, but I also think we of course need a lot of action from the European states, as well as I think somebody pointed out I think René, that we still need cross coordination across the EU so that we can really improve things. The justice aspect is important, and I hope also academic research will explore more of these kind of interconnections between energy justice and security, not only within the EU, but I think global justice and the intergenerational perspective is important, as well as what we called recognition justice and how that links to security. How do we recognize indigenous people, vulnerable groups, children and the young in the transition? And I think I want to end with saying I think we need to be careful that we don't just kind of move from one problem, our previous dependency on Russian fossil fuels, to a new problem, whether it's damaging in our environment in search for critical raw materials or dependence on LNG. So I think we really have to learn, and we have to kind of have a broader approach in the future. So thank you from my behalf, and I know that Jörg still wants to say a few words.
Thank you. Thank you, Paula. Thank you. If you just allow me 1 minute of thanks to close this meeting, I also would like to thank all the panelists and speakers of today. A special thanks to Paula, Claire and Bill and all the working group members of this EASAC working group for their work and contribution that has gone into writing this report. Very impressive result. Thank you also to the colleagues behind the scenes who organized this meeting: Andrea Windecker, Chris Brosset, Charlotte Dietrich, Sabine Froning, Jorik Enters and Tanja Hoffmann. Thank you so much. And thank you to the audience for watching, for engaging with us. Please engage with us also on social media. Don't hesitate to contact us anytime at secretariat@easac.eu. Thank you so much, and have a good rest of the day.